I've been looking forward to this intro. No, next up is Jason Grigsby. I have known Jason for a very long time. Makes us both sound old. Actually, fun fact is the very first conference talk I ever gave, Jason was in that room pretty much front and center. It was actually very nice and kind and receptive, like just encouraging. Things went downhill from there, but it really meant a lot as a first-time speaker. But no, Jason's a wonderful speaker, wonderful friend. Always look forward to hearing from him, getting a chance to hang out with him. He's always got some very interesting insights. You know, his fun fact that he provided with me, I guess his lifelong dream is to go to New Zealand at some point, and he's just kind of waiting for that to happen. So, yeah, everybody welcome Jason on the stage.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tim. I thought I'd just start right in, but I do need to acknowledge that I had a dream of going to Webstock, which was this amazing conference in New Zealand, and I never got there, but Tim did, and so every time I see him, he rubs it in a little bit, talks about the helicopter he got to go on, so I have a little jealousy there. I'll get him back, though. So it's wonderful to be here. I was here in 2018. I really love this city. I love this conference. Been thinking back a little bit. One of my colleagues reminded me of sort of my earliest impressions of the web, and I just want to talk about that for a moment because it's actually a little relevant. And to provide some context, I had a computer in the 4th grade. I was online in the 5th. I used to be able to whistle at 1200 baud to turn off the modem. Spent a lot of time on bulletin board systems, and then Quantum Link, which is a precursor of AOL. And then like when I got to college, it was using Pine and Gopher and all these systems. And so consequently, when I saw the web, I thought it sucked. It was slow, and I thought it would go nowhere. And I was wrong, obviously, right? Like my ability to predict stuff, it was slow, but you know, obviously I'm here all these years later building a career on the web. But I realized just recently that I was only half wrong, that the web was slow. It's still slow. It's just bigger than it used to be. I've really enjoyed being able to make the sites that I work on fast. I take a great deal of satisfaction being able to use the metrics and be able to see how we can build sites that are faster. And I feel really successful at that most of the time, but I gotta tell you, there's like one area that I am just kind of stuck, including this remote for some reason. I feel like I cannot make the impact that I want, and that area is actually with third-party scripts. Now, third-party scripts are, in my mind, they're different than the rest of the areas that I work on in performance. So if I talk about something like images I think have always been difficult from like the earliest days of the web. When we first started putting image tags onto the web, they were challenging. There are all these different formats, 256 color safe, web safe colors, but they're also relatively straightforward to solve, right? If I'm trying to solve a problem with images on a site, like we'll identify the problem, and they're usually common things. Paul talked earlier about this problem of like people lazy loading header images. Sometimes they're not using responsive images syntax, right? Like we identify those problems, we talk about some solutions, we teach, we implement those fixes, and then we're done. But third-party scripts are much more complex. They don't ever follow that pattern. And I know that there are a lot of people who are new to this community who might be here today, so I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. When I talk about third-party scripts, I'm talking specifically about JavaScript provided by external sites or services. And I'm talking specifically about JavaScript, even though third-party assets in general can be problematic from a performance perspective. As Alex Russell has said, JavaScript is the most expensive asset that we can add to a web page, so I like to focus on that. So businesses rely on third parties for critical web functionality. And so I'll have these situations. For example, we had a client that I was consulting with last year that was using Bolt for their checkout experience. So Bolt provides, like just this custom checkout and cart abandonment functionality. And when I went and started looking at their site, I realized that it was adding almost 800K of JavaScript into every page on their site. It was including the entire React library in that, and that if I removed it, that there was a 2.4 second or so time to first byte, or I'm sorry, total blocking time reduction. So I'm like, hey, have this conversation. This is where I get stuck. Hey, do you need Bolt? They're like, yeah, it powers our entire checkout and our cart abandonment stuff. Plus, it's peak. It's the holiday season. We can't change anything anyways. So that's the typical frustrating conversation. But there's a variant on this that's actually worse. And that's, hey, do you need Bolt? And they're like, we like it, but we'd be okay with an alternative. What do you recommend? I'm like, I don't know. I just know this one sucks. I don't have a full inventory of all of the checkout things that I can go talk to you about. And speaking of sucking, I'm gonna shame Bolt for a moment. They have this whole webpage where they talk about how merchants oftentimes use performance tools to analyze their page load time to get an understanding, and they want to provide some context because those tools may say that Bolt is a problem, but it's not really a problem. And you tell on yourself first by having this page, and second by the fact that you talk about Core Web Vitals, but you only include 2 of the 3. And you leave out the one that actually measures JavaScript impact. So Bolt, maybe if your application was faster, you wouldn't need this page. So the web performance community tends to hate third-party scripts because we can build something that's really fast, and then like a Trojan horse, these tag managers come in and they insert stuff into the web page and they make sites slow. And I've got to say that one of the things that I've discovered is that people who develop third-party services, third-party scripts, actually hate other third-party scripts. So we'll talk to people and they'll talk about how they'll have clients of theirs that will gradually, their site will get slower and slower as people keep adding stuff into their tag manager. And then at some point it'll get too slow, but they won't know how to solve the problem. So they'll just rip them all out. Whether the third-party script is performant or not, they're just all gone. So despite our warnings, third-party scripts continue to plague websites. These are information from the Web Almanac from HTTP Archive. We see that 94% of mobile websites have at least one third-party resource. The median for mobile is 43 on the top 1,000 sites, 55 for desktop. That's 45% of all requests and 34% of all scripts. So if this were a war or maybe a game of chess or something, the reality is that the web performance community would be losing. We're not actually making the progress that we want. So today I want to talk a little about how we analyze third-party performance. Once you've got that information, what you can do with it, and maybe you'll be more successful than I am. Take a look at some newer options, and then I've got a little bit of a call to action for the people who are in this room. So first, how do we analyze third-party script performance? And to do that, we're going to do a third-party audit. So thankfully, I reached out on the web and tried to find a website that would let me do sort of a public view of their site, monicaandandy.com. It's a really cute children's clothing site, and their developer, Joshua Michaels, let me use there. So you'll see a lot of their information in this presentation, and I just want to thank them for letting me use them. So the first question we want to ask ourselves is which third parties are being used? And we can get this several ways, but one of the nice ways to get it is via request map generator. So request map generator will create a map that shows you the relationship between various requests and sort of what they download. And it's not just nice. I mean, it's nice because it's interactive and you can show it to your client, and that's cool. But the other thing that's nice is that you can generate it either by adding a URL or by if you know the web page test ID. So in that version, there were a lot of tests ahead. So if I've already got a web page test, I can just go in and, that was weird, add it to this URL, and it'll generate the map without having to go through that whole process and wait. So back in 2018, when we were presenting this, or at this conference, Harry Roberts actually showed an example of a spreadsheet that actually pulled in a bunch of information from request map. so that you could actually see all these third parties. And then you could, it kind of color-coded them and things of that nature. It was really nice. Unfortunately, if you go to the current request map version and you download it, it doesn't look like what Harry showed because request map has changed. So I dug in a little bit on this. If you go to the old version of request map, which is linked to from the footer, you can actually then download a version. And one thing to note, like the different versions are all on different domains. That's how you can figure out which version you're on. So if you're on domainmap.webperf.tools, you're on the old version. And if you download it, you will get Harry's spreadsheet to work. But unfortunately, because it's old enough now, a lot of the information is out of date. So a lot of stuff shows up as unknown. There's also a beta version of request map. And so if you go to the beta version and you download in the upper right corner, you download the domain survey CSV file, then you can import it into the spreadsheet and get all of the same sort of coloring and stuff that we want. So I updated Harry's spreadsheet. You can get access to it at bit.ly/third-party audit. And while I'm thinking about it, actually, I already posted the slides, so if anyone wants to look at them, they're at bit.ly/third-party woes. So now we've got the spreadsheet, and oh, I forgot. This is important. In order to make sure that you get the color coding, you need to make a copy of that spreadsheet, and then you need to select the first column, first row, and then import it, and then you do this replace data at cell, and then you get all of the colors. Okay, so what's the overall impact of third parties on the site? So just like high level, what are we looking at? We can take the domains column in that spreadsheet, copy it, replace the, we want to delete any first party domains. So in this case, this particular site is a headless Shopify site. So we're going to remove the main domain and the CDN for Shopify. And then we're going to take the rest of the domains and we're going to replace the new lines with just spaces. And then we can take that blob of text and bring it into web page test and then block all of those in advanced settings. And that will give us a page test that we can compare to a regular one to see what the impact is. Here's one tip that I say to you so that you do as I say and not as I do. Whenever you do something like this, always check the domains tab to make sure that it actually successfully blocked all the domains. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out why you've got really weird results because something was wrong in your test. So once you confirm that you've blocked the domains that you want, you can compare those two results. And then you get something like this where you can look at the film strip and compare what it's like when third parties load. Oh, also there's this opacity thing that apparently now, I think it's a bug in web page test where the film strip is like stuck, so I can't actually access that. But if it weren't stuck, it'd look pretty cool. And then there's some information where you can compare different pieces of the page. And while I'm kind of on this, just as an aside, like, what are we going to do about catch point and web page test? So I've been having some conversations with them. I think, it seems like they've been moving it to a new platform, and hopefully there will be a reinvestment. But that's also laid off a lot of people. And like, web page test is a community asset, and it makes me nervous. And I know it's made other people nervous. And so I'm really hopeful that they will invest again in web page test, particularly because like some of the stuff is really cool. So if you pay for web page test, you get access to opportunities and experiments. And I love opportunities and experiments because it provides this like nice, real quick summary. Well, first off, it allows you to like just, hey, what would happen if I preloaded the latest, largest contentful paint image, right? Like, what if I did that LCP image preloading? I can just check a box, run a test, see what the impact would be. Like, really, really fun. But you also get result pages that have really nice summaries of what's happening. And I like them so much that I wanted to do that for this domain test. And so I sort of asked around, and Harry was very helpful and suggested actually that I use the find and replace text with regex to do the same thing I was doing by blocking all those domains, but actually just blocking them with search and replace, so that I could actually just get the report in the way that I wanted. So you can do that. You can actually go in and instead of replacing them with spaces, replace them with pipe characters, and then you need to make sure that you have a slash in front of any of the periods, and then add a little grep to the front and the back. You'll end up with some sort of string that looks a bit like this, and then you can do the find and replace, and you can get results in the experiments, which is really nice because now you can say, oh, like it would be 10.41 seconds faster on total blocking time if we didn't have third-party scripts. But again, I told you before that you need to be careful and double-check those domains because you may find, like I did, that some of those domains were still coming through. And the reason for that was that I dug in a little further, and Bizarre Voice was actually getting added by one of their first-party domain scripts. So in order to block that, I went in to web page test, and you've got the ability to block specific requests, and I tried that, and then I got the result, and I checked again, and it was still there, very persistent. So further down on the page, you can block individual results. I suspect this is actually about like the order in which these things are getting processed. I'm not entirely certain, but that worked. Finally, Bizarre Voice is out of my results, and I can see that it's 11.67 total blocking time for third parties. So now that we know high level what the third parties are, like that's useful for having conversations with other stakeholders, but it's not actually what we want to know. We want to know which ones are causing the most trouble. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at the spreadsheet. I was going to say, like, it probably doesn't make sense to try to instrument every single third party. Like, there are a bunch of smaller third parties that probably aren't going to make that much of a difference. So I want to look at some things that might give me clues as to which third-party scripts I should look at first. So, for example, I could use the spreadsheet to look at the ones that pass the most information along. Or I could go into a Lighthouse report, preferably one from like a web page test run, and look at the amount of unused JavaScript, or sort by total blocking time and go in and look for third-party scripts that are doing the most in terms of JavaScript execution. I just added this, like Paul talked about this after I uploaded my slides. So Paul's got that tool for third-party Explorer that he talked about this morning, and you could use that also to look for which third-party scripts seem to be the most likely to cause problems. And then you could either block them the same way we blocked all the domains, or if you are addicted to experiments and the results page like I am, you could actually go in and just take out those particular domains and actually see what the impact would be. So for example, on Monica and Andy's site, they've got a chatbot. I'm going to analyze that chatbot. I isolate that. I see that it would be 2.24 seconds faster for LCP. Not a big difference in total blocking time. I bring that information back into the spreadsheet. I make some notes. Like, basically what I'm doing is attempting to understand what the impact of these scripts are so that I can have a conversation with the client about the ones that have the biggest potential impact on their site. All right, so what can you do with this information? And this is where, I mean, it's like if it were images, I'd be like, okay, here's what you need to do to fix it. But no, like, all I can tell you is that the next thing you have to do is have a conversation. And those conversations really like center around a series of questions like, is this script necessary? Is it duplicative of another script? Like, that's one of the nice things about getting that whole list and sort of the highlighting that it does of things that have similar usage. You can actually sometimes see like, oh, this script was put in a while ago and it's no longer in use, or this script does the same thing this other script does, and maybe we don't need both of them. So you can get some of that information from the spreadsheet because it'll highlight in yellow places that are duplicated in each row or in each column. Is it needed on every page? Like oftentimes scripts actually only really apply to certain areas of a site but are included on every page. And I think that at least is a portion, although not the entirety, of why in the Web Almanac we see a large amount of unused JavaScript being supplied by third parties. A lot of that's also bundling issues. Can the script provider improve performance? I can't remember, was it Paul this morning that was talking about having conversations? I think it was Paul talking about like, hey, these things aren't gzipped, and like talking to people about having that. That's amazing. Like people have all these stories all the time about having success getting third parties to, maybe people just ask better than I do, but my experience is not as good on that. But that would be a great place, like get the third parties to improve the performance. Can we self-host it? So if we can host the script ourselves, it'll be faster. And perhaps we could execute the script on the server or on the edge. Can we use defer or async for loading? Most third-party scripts, according to the Web Almanac, are actually async. But a lot of them probably could be defer, which would get us a little bit more of a boost because they don't require loading in a particular order. And then can we use a facade to only load when it's necessary? And this is one of my favorite things. I think there should be more of this done. So we've done this on a couple of sites, like doing things similar to what Light YouTube Embed does, where it's it looks like YouTube, but it's not actually YouTube. It's just a placeholder, and until somebody interacts with it, then it goes and downloads the YouTube code. We've done that for other video providers to avoid sort of the big impact. And if we only did that for YouTube, it would make a big difference because YouTube by far is one of the worst in terms of blocking the main thread. So we go through all these questions, right? And we're like, man, we're going to make this site so fast. And this, my friends, is where I always get stuck. Because the conversations go like this, right? Like, we've got this client, Champion Power Equipment. They manufacture generators, and they have reviews on their site. And we recently had to move them from Power Reviews to Bazaar Voice. And we had to move them because basically Home Depot and other large retailers use Bazaar Voice, and they need to be able to syndicate reviews to those sites. And so it doesn't matter whether like Power Reviews or Yotpo or any of these other services are faster than what Bazaar Voice does. Doesn't matter whether we would want to handle it other ways. Like, we're just kind of stuck. So all of that kind of got me looking at and thinking about this problem in a different way. And just to back up a little bit, a few years ago, I made this joke, like that we had remade the internet in our own image, which in the United States means obese, it went around quite a bit. But like I've been thinking about even that differently. So in December 2019, my father had a stroke. He ended up with a trach and was bedridden. And he was coming out of the hospital in April 2020, which was the height of the pandemic. And so having somebody with a tracheostomy, direct path to their lungs, is not like the ideal thing to have in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. So we took him into our house, and we took care of him. And like, I'm really happy we did. Like, I think we probably gave him 3.5 more years of life that he wouldn't have otherwise had. But during that period of time, like, we neglected ourselves. So my weight ballooned. I had a couple of health scares. And so, at some point I realized, like, I did not want to burden my kids with that same situation that I had had. So I made a commitment to get healthier, right? And so I started working out regularly. This is the space that used to be the hospital room for my father. It is now, like I've started with a rowing machine, and now I've got workout equipment. And, I was making quite a bit of progress. But, at some point, it kind of plateaued. I still enjoy working out, and I realize that working out is not the same as eating less and like all of these sorts of things. But it's a challenge. And in the past, I probably would have looked at that as a failing of myself, right? Like I don't have the willpower to avoid food. But because of Ozempic and like all the conversations going on around it, I've started to really think about that differently. Like, okay, there's actually something going on, a little biology there that it sure would be nice to have something that reduced cravings, that reduced the way that I look at this stuff. And so I started thinking about website owners and their inability to avoid third parties the same way that I have trouble avoiding sweets, and wondering if there might be some like way to just give people a little boost, like a little extra help in that regard. And so it started by looking at PartyTown. So PartyTown is a library that allows third parties to run inside of a web worker. And the advantage of doing this is that third parties, one of the problems that they have is that they compete with other things that are actually more important for user interaction for the main thread. So if you can move them to a web worker, then they're away from that main thread. They're not competing in the same way. And the first time we implemented this, I felt like I actually wrote in Slack, I feel like we just found a cheat code because it was so much better than what we were doing before. And it was amazing for 2 weeks. And then what happened was that the client had some additional third-party stuff that they inserted into GTM, and we had GTM inside of the worker, and because GTM was in the worker, that meant that script was in the worker, and because the script was in the worker, it didn't work, which is ironic, but that is actually the end result, and so they just yanked PartyTown out of the whole thing, and so we weren't able to do it. But I was still so enamored with this that we spent time last summer trying to figure out if we could like build a product around it. And eventually like came to the conclusion that it was like too finicky. We couldn't quite get it to work. So I actually reached out to Adam Bradley, who's one of the people who created PartyTown, to get a little bit of his perspective on what he's seen. I'm just going to play you a little bit of what Adam said.
It was kind of more of an experiment. We do have customers that use it, and where sadly I don't have the time to just dedicate to just it. So I think it has not gotten the attention that it deserves. And so I do know that a lot of people are quite a few people, and I think even Walmart is using it. And so if it works great for you first try, then that's great. It's kind of what a lot of it was hoping for, is that like you can just drop it in and it's going to work. But that said, there's a lot of stuff happening under the hood and there's a million different analytics in the world, different, the way they wrote it, how old the JavaScript is. There's so many different scenarios, endless scenarios of how analytics work and how they play with the rest of the world, that it can't solve all world problems. It's kind of like part of the realization I've had with PartyTown, is that like, if you hit a road bump, more than likely, then you won't be able to use it. And so if it works for you out of the box, great. If something's wrong, then it probably is using some obscure way the JavaScript was written that we can't really fix it.
Yeah. So again, you could try it, and if it works for you in the scripts that are on your site, awesome. But if it doesn't, good luck. You probably won't be able to. Another tool that I just learned about a couple months ago and that I've been trying to investigate in is Zeraz, which was then purchased by Cloudflare. And what this does is it actually moves third-party scripts to running in edge workers at the end of CDNs. So in theory, this would not only provide big performance benefits, but it actually would increase privacy, because these third-party scripts would be first-party scripts. And it would reduce the impact of, say, content blockers, because a lot of ad blocking things would not have the same concerns if it was actually just going directly to that site instead of going to a third party. So the way that it works is it's a bit like a tag manager, right? Like GTM or something like that, you can go in, you can select different things. But it's only, at the moment, I think, got like 50 different things that it supports. Most of them are pretty focused on analytics. So on the one hand, it's really nice. Like if you use it for Google Analytics or for like Facebook Beacon or things of that nature, you can actually have it just fire one event and have it go to the worker, and then the worker will do the job of actually sending it wherever it needs to go. And you reduce the amount of time for all of the different third-party JavaScripts that you use this with. But it is like, it seems really, really new. They just started adding being able to do server-side embeds. I was going to try to do this with Monica and Andy's site so that I could like provide a before and after performance measures on it. But what I realized was that because Monica and Andy's site is using GTM and they're inserting a lot of stuff via GTM, and I didn't want to mess with their GTM profile, which seemed like a bad thing to do for a live site in the purpose of like conducting an experiment for a talk, that I couldn't actually like conduct that experiment. So apologies. But it is interesting, and they've been talking even about trying to sort of standardize or come up with some sort of specification. They have an open source library where maybe you could do this outside of Cloudflare. But I do like the idea of actually moving what we could from third parties away from running inside of the browser and running them on the edge. Some other options that you could consider. Google Tag Manager has a server-side option that I don't see a lot of people using, primarily because I actually think it's pretty complex to set up, and you have to host it on Google domains and stuff like that. But if you actually set that up, it's kind of nice because, again, you can kind of consolidate scripts so that instead of multiple scripts trying to watch for page views or watching for somebody clicking on a button, you can actually just send that event once and then disperse it through the server-side tagging. Yota is a company that I was talking to last year. They attempt to make third-party scripts faster by actually reordering the sequence of JavaScript. So they're not actually like solving, I think, the same level of performance stuff, but like they attempt to like say, okay, this script isn't really necessary unless the person scrolls like down the page or something of that nature, and then they change it. I think that this solution made a lot more sense when we were using first input delay, where like maybe a script that loaded much later and impacted the user experience wasn't as important as something. Now with interaction next paint, where it looks at the entirety of it, I suspect that the sequencing may not get us as far, but it is kind of like, I think that they do see some success with that. Although I got to tell you, like when I was looking for explanations for how it works, I stumbled onto a marketing PDF that I'm sure that their technical team probably hates if they know about it, because it says that you can use all the third parties you want without sacrificing site speed. Come on. No. And I know that they actually don't believe that.
I kind of ran into the same.
Sorry, just one other piece, like with all of these solutions, like I ran into this like fundamental challenge that I could not work around, and Adam talked about it here.
I kind of ran into the same issue of like, it looks like it's working great, but the fear I would always have is like, someone from marketing saying that like, we're all of a sudden having 50% drop off on this day, and that was like, that's where it would be very, very difficult to debug why, like what API, what random scenario, what was the reason why you're only getting 50% or something like that, is also like the huge challenge,
So, there are no miracle diets for web performance. And to be fair, like I'm not looking for a miracle. I'm just looking for something that in the same way, like kind of like diminishes the hunger, which is apparently what like stuff like Ozempic does, like just something that's a little assist. I also think that most website owners have no idea that adding a third-party script will impact their site performance, their customer experience, and their revenue. And even if they do, it's really hard for them to know what to select, right? We have all of this history and knowledge that tells us that eating an apple is going to be better for us than eating a donut, right? But if you actually go in and you start trying to compare third-party scripts, you can find a lot of different websites that actually will provide you with information about all these different services and the competitors. Like, I did a search for Bazaar Voice competitors, and I visited every single one of these pages, or the first set of them. And I found, like, like all of these different things and the ratings, and like, you'll even find web pages where we've got filters for all of these different types of facets of what you might select, and give you ways to compare between the different third-party services. You know what's not on any of them? None of them have the performance. There's no way, if you actually were a site owner and you decided, I actually care, right? Like, between these different services, which one is going to actually provide me with a better experience or a more performant experience? You can't find out. Like, most of the time, you don't know what the performance impact of a third-party script is going to be until after you've signed a contract, you've spent time and money on the implementation. If you're not monitoring performance, you may not even recognize the impact of it when it goes live. And by the time you figure it out, you may be too reliant on that third party to actually make a change. And that, of course, is assuming that you had a choice in the first place, right? If you're like Champion, where everybody's using Bazaar Voice, you're kind of stuck. Now, I actually have a little confession to make. Like, I built all these slides and the outline of the talk and everything, and then I stumbled on something at like the last moment. So I was looking at third-party web, which is this really cool resource that visualizes the impact of third-party scripts on the web. And I was trying to figure out where they got the data from, and I was in their Git repo, and I come across this comment, and I'm like, what's that link? Like, what are they talking about? So I follow this link, and it's the Core Web Vitals technical report, which I had never seen before. Where you can actually select things like multiple review providers and then like compare them based on Core Web Vitals, and actually see like maybe some data, give you some hints about which ones might be faster. Another thing, I'm looking at this page like, wait, there's a new report? I just learned about this one. So you can go there, and actually there's a new version of it, and it also provides you with the ability to look at and select a series of bits of technology, and then maybe you can pick a few competitors and compare them. And I was like, well, this is amazing. Why doesn't anyone talk about this? And so I went on the site. I'm like, I'd never even seen this. Where is it? And then I found it in the menu at the very bottom. And I got to say, like, I would have never guessed that the Core Web Vitals technical report is how I could search for third parties and their relative impact. I actually thought that it would be like some of the other ones, like the state of JavaScript that shows like JavaScript over time or things of that nature. But this is actually fully interactive, very cool. Y'all should check it out. And my apologies to those who worked on it that I didn't know about it sooner. So now I want to talk about like what we in this room might be able to do. And so I was trying to think of like an analogy, because I don't know how much this is coming through, but I actually feel like this has been futile. Like I feel like working to try to make third parties faster is just this losing battle. I thought the analogy might be the Dutch boy with his finger in the dike, but apparently that's not even a Dutch reference. That's like an American version of a Dutch story. And it's not right either, because in that case, like, he puts his finger in the dike and holds it long enough, and then he like saves the village or the country or something of that nature. So instead, I found actually like the perfect encapsulation of what analogy of what it's like on third parties. And it's actually like we're here, like we're just shoveling our driveway, trying to make sure that our third parties are going well, and then right, like. This, and then all the snow comes down and makes all the work we're doing useless. So we're trying to make our sites performant, and then third parties come in. So what can we do about this? So first, like, we need to encourage third parties to prioritize performance. Maybe like we need some way to like give them badges or like something that they can tout about their performance. I don't know who would supply those badges or what they would look like. I don't know whether we should shame people, like the carrot versus the stick, but Like right now, we see a tremendous amount of interest from site owners related to being able to use Core Web Vitals and having that impact search results. But I don't really think we've got something similar for third parties, and so they don't have the same sort of incentive to try to answer these questions other than when clients who are using their services are upset. Which brings me to the question of like, what could browsers do to help? And there was a pretty good article by Addy a couple of years ago about some of the things that they were thinking about. So maybe they can do some help there. Maybe they could be our Ozempic. We should require timing allow origin headers on any time we have a third party, right? Like, and this shouldn't be a big thing, but it'll allow us to measure those. And from the Web Almanac, not very many third-party resources are actually using this. And this is something where if you're involved in the purchasing process, you could basically have that written into the contract. If you're not involved, you could just walk into a room when you're in the implementation phase and say, hey, it's our policy that any third parties need to implement the timing allow origin headers. And even if you just made up that policy like 5 minutes ago, like when you say it's a policy, people believe you. And they want your business, so they'll go ahead and do it, right? So go ahead and ask for that. We need to make it easier for site owners to compare the performance of different third-party scripts. So we just saw that Core Web Vitals technical report. I'm wondering, like, could we convince those sites that do comparisons to bring that in? Like, my dream is that when a client goes to go compare third-party sites and they're like looking at the tables and they're like, oh, these are the features and this is the cost and these are the different pieces, that somewhere there's a row that's actually performance, right? I know that it's not going to be the only reason that somebody picks one third party over another. I just want a seat at the table for those discussions. We should coordinate to try to get more solutions to move third parties into workers or onto the server, onto the edge, recipes for them to do that and ways to reward the organizations that do that. We should share tips in this community on how to make third parties more performant. And on that, I've got to say, like, I recently learned about the web performance community Slack. And I would not say that I'm like a member of this community. I'm like sort of like adjacent periphery to this community. So I didn't know about it. But the thing about it is that like it's a free version of Slack, which means that like you can't find information more than 90 days in the past. So if you go to implement a third party and you're like, hey, has anyone already done this? What worked for them? What didn't work for them? You can't find this information. Ironically, the way that I found out about it was from somebody talking about how they'd started a discussion forum to provide information about and to like get the information out of Slack so that it was web accessible, and that they were shuttering it. And I was like, wait, there's a Slack? So I don't think that that's a sustainable solution. I don't think that this community should be putting its knowledge into a black hole where nobody can get access to it. So those are just ideas. I don't know that unfortunately, I don't have answers for this problem. I signed up to this talk to basically have a therapy session about third parties. But I am actually really optimistic in some ways because I've seen a community do really amazing things. So I was part of the group that worked on the responsive images community group, and we created a new standard for images on the web, and there was no community when we started, right? Like it was just a bunch of random developers who were trying to figure out what to do with images and responsive designs, who were on a W3C list, and some rando said we should go create a community group, and we didn't know that person was a rando, so we created a community group, and then we went and like created a standard. This community already exists, which means that the people who are in this room who are watching on the live stream, those are the people who actually might be able to look at this and solve these problems. And so my request is that we actually start dreaming big, right? Like 5 years from now, this talk shouldn't exist. That's my big dream. Like, I want to be able to have solutions. Or maybe this talk exists, but it's no longer about like the problems that we have and like how you have to have discussions, but it's here are the steps you take and the solutions you could have for third parties. And if there's any group that could do it, it's this group. I have faith. Like, I'd love to hear what ideas you have. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, that was, I feel like that's how all of us feel at the end of a third-party audit, is like a little bit of that, like we just need a few minutes of therapy and stuff. Unfortunately, not all of us have the stage to get on right away, but that would feel good, I think. Yeah, so there were a couple, so one question that came up was around, let me just ask this first. Is it okay? You can be like, no. Like, did you ask Bolt about the performance issues, and what was their response to it?
I did not ask Bolt about the performance issues.
Okay.
No.
All right, just curious.
Yeah.
So from the, you hinted at it a little bit there, where you're talking about like, you know, the testing ahead of time, or trying to figure out ahead of time, like what the impact is going to be. You know, have you tried anything? Do you have any recommendations on how you make sure if you can get the ability to test before, like, agreeing to the contract? Because it seems like that's when your purchasing power is, right? Like, that's when you have an active threat to potentially not sign on, is like you're probably got the most control.
Yeah. So I would say that in our role, it rarely happens. So we're almost always like coming in after a site has already had performance problems, or we're working with the client and they already have whatever the relationships are. It's really rare where we're actually in that piece of the discussion where they're selecting between multiple different clients. At the times where it does happen, it's particularly frustrating because like maybe you can go look at an implementation on another site and try to get a sense of how it's working, which is usually where I start. Like, okay, I'm going to go look at one of the example sites that they provided to us that's implemented it the way that they want to implement, and I'll do some performance analysis on that. But like, is that using the exact same version that we're going to be using of that third party? You know, are they doing other things that make it not work quite the same way that we would? It feels like, and then like you think, okay, well maybe they would give us an early version that we could then integrate with and try. But depending on the script and what services they provide, that sort of like early demo version may or may not be useful unless you spend a lot of time configuring it and setting it up, and then you've done all that work just to like validate whether it's going to happen or not happen. And for us, because we're a provider for the client, like that would all be time that the client would have to spend with us. So they're very unlikely to do that early on. Yeah.
And I guess to some extent, I mean, like if we're dreaming big, like right now it is obviously like it's up to us, like implementing these things to do all the legwork on that kind of thing, right? We're the ones that are being incentivized on that side of it so much. And I guess in more of the dream big picture, like the ideal scenario is like this is like, it's not you, the agency, it's not your customer doing the legwork on this, it's the third party being in that position. And so one of the things you brought up like with that technology report and then kind of showing like some of the places where you could look up and see different kind of apps. What would you like, could be a terrible idea, so feel free to just slap me. But like, imagine like a Shopify. No,
well,
okay, hold on. I'm backing that one up. But imagine there's like the Shopify marketplace. That was a terrible thing to say. The Shopify marketplace, for example, right? Yeah. You've got all of these different apps and stuff in the Shopify marketplace. Shopify, we know, has all sorts of performance data.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, like imagine like a marketplace is now prominently displaying, here's your options, here's the percentage that we see passing Core Web Vitals.
Yeah, that would be, actually, that I think is like, God, was that your idea or somebody else's?
That was mine.
Oh, jeez.
It was yours, and then I
hate to say it, but yeah, that's a really good idea, Tim. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, like Shopify would be great because yes, they've got all that data and they've got their own market, and it is a place where they've got such a huge impact, and it's a place where so many Shopify owners go. Like, yeah, that's we should ring up. Where's Yoav? There's some Shopify people here. Like,
yeah, Yoav's actually around here. Actually, Yoav came to mind during your talk because I know there's another big push around PCI compliance and being able to have detailed reporting coming up, like some really interesting challenges with being able to report. I mean, you point out the visibility issue, like you're trying to figure out on web page tests, where did this third-party thing get injected from? And so part of the need of the new PCI requirements is like to be able to have that very accurate, detailed, precise reporting of exactly what is on the site. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to piggyback off of that. Because it feels like some of this is a reporting issue and like an understanding like that this stuff is a problem in the first place and that it exists.
yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever play around with or see any of like the feature policy or permissions policy stuff?
Oh, gosh, I did have an idea actually. So no, tell me more, and then I've got an idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at one point there was a feature policy. I think it's the artist formerly known as feature policy. Now I believe it's permission policy, and I think you've lost some of the stuff that was in feature policy. But in feature policy, the premise was you pass a header, and there were all sorts of features that you could basically say, we will not allow these from these particular origins. But in addition to that, you had things like, we will not allow legacy image formats, which when I blogged about that, I got in trouble with JPEG people all over the place. But like, you know, you could say, I'm not going to allow, you know, unoptimized images. I'm not going to allow, I think that was actually one of them, like not properly sized images or something. Like you had the ability not just for browser features, but to put some limits, or at least get reporting, because you could have the report only mode, but put some limits on like those kinds of things. And I was wondering if there's potentially a really valid use case around restricting ad size, third-party size, like from that perspective.
The challenge though is that like, I feel like it's almost always with third parties, it's all about like what's going on for the business, right? So it's like you can try to implement that stuff, but then if it's powering checkout and cart abandonment, you're not going to be able to do it. The thing that I was thinking of, which I think is similar, so the content security policy. So I actually was wondering if you could go in and wire it in so that you basically force the time allowed, what's it?
Time allow origin?
Yeah. So you basically, you took that policy that you made up 5 minutes ago and you actually implemented it in code. And then, but I didn't look into, it was one of the things I meant to look into. I didn't look into whether you could actually enforce that and sort of make third parties do it, or at least like have them have some sort of warning mechanism if they're not doing it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the right place to have those conversations. So hopefully, yeah, I mean, feel free to pull Jason aside and like, if you've got a way to solve this or an idea that's prompted, or if you're at one of those marketplaces,
yeah, I would love to hear
it.
what people are thinking, or if you've got ideas on how we might be able to, you know, make sure that something like this isn't necessary 5 years from now.
No, agreed. All right, thanks, Jason.
Yep, thank you.